They called him small before they even learned his name. Among the towering species of the Galactic Assembly, the Terran delegate barely reached the shoulder of a Threx officer. His frame was thin, wrapped in the simple gray of a frontier uniform, no scales, no claws, no radiant exoskeleton, just flesh and bone. To the spectators of the Hall of Predation, he looked like prey. Rows of apex species filled the Colosseum-sized chamber, each one forged by evolution to dominate their world. The Karak with their blade wings that could shear through hull steel, the J-Car, whose jaws could crush stone, the Athari, serpentine telepaths whose minds could silence planets. And standing in the center, small and steady, was Lieutenant Mason Holt, one human from a system the galaxy had mocked since first contact. When the Assembly had invited him, it hadn't been an honor. It was entertainment. Every decade, the predators of the galaxy held the Feast of Dominion, a bloodless trial where the strongest species displayed dominance through feats of instinct and intimidation. The invitation sent to Earth had been a joke, an experiment in humiliation. They hadn't expected the Terran to arrive. Now, as the lights dimmed and the chorus of alien roars echoed through the hall, Mason lifted his gaze to the colossal figure seated above all others, the apex of the apex, the reigning champion of the feast for 200 cycles. The Varr'th Primarch. He stood nearly 5 meters tall, a creature of muscle and obsidian hide, 4 arms folded across a chest like carved stone. His voice rumbled through the arena like thunder over mountains. "Small Terran," he said, the words dripping contempt and curiosity in equal measure. "Why stand before hunters when your kind cannot even bare their teeth?" The audience laughed, deep, guttural, cruel. Mason didn't answer. He only studied the Primarch's eyes, eyes that, despite their savage glow, held something he recognized: calculation, wariness. Then Mason spoke, quiet enough that the translation field had to strain to catch it. "Because every predator forgets the prey that learned to stand." The laughter faltered. The Primarch tilted his head, an almost imperceptible twitch of interest. "Then stand," he said, "and show us your worth." From the shadowed pits, 6 combat drones rose, their metal limbs glistening under the light. They were designed to test reflex and fear response, non-lethal but merciless. The crowd leaned forward. Mason didn't move until the first drone lunged. Then he vanished. Not with teleportation, not with cloaking, he moved. So fast the visual feed stuttered. A flash of motion, a hiss of displaced air, and one drone hit the floor in 2 perfect halves. Gasps rippled through the stands. The second drone fired. Mason pivoted, letting the plasma bolt skim past his shoulder, using the momentum to drive his elbow into the machine's head. The impact rang like a gong. Metal crumpled. The Primarch's grin widened. Interesting. 3 more drones swarmed. Mason didn't retreat, he closed. He ducked, rolled, drew something from his belt, a vibroknife no longer than his hand, and carved a blur of arcs through the storm of limbs. Sparks scattered like constellations. 30 seconds later, silence. All 6 drones lay in ruin. Mason stood in the center, chest heaving once, twice, then stilling. His uniform smoked. A shallow cut bled along his cheek, and he wiped it away with 2 fingers. The Hall of Predation, built for the roars of beasts, was silent. Then the Primarch rose. He descended the dais step by step, each movement shaking the ground. When he stopped before the human, the difference in size was absurd, like a mountain regarding a spark. Yet he didn't strike. He studied Mason for a long moment, then slowly extended one massive hand, palm open. The translators struggled because his next word wasn't a title or insult. It was a sound, a low, guttural tone used only among his own kind when greeting equals. "Kin." The crowd erupted, not with laughter this time, but disbelief. A Varr'th had called an off-worlder kin, and somewhere in the noise, Mason Holt simply looked up and whispered, "Then maybe you finally understand what kind of predators we really are." The word kin echoed through the chamber like a tremor. Even the great predators of the outer clusters knew what that word meant when spoken by a Varr'th Primarch. It was not casual. It was not symbolic. It was sacred, the bond of equals, the oath of fang and blood. The assembly erupted. Representatives of countless apex species hissed and shouted through their translators, their voices mixing into chaos. "Blasphemy!" cried the Athari delegate, coils lashing through the air. "The Terran is soft. Its bones can break. The Primarch dishonors the feast," howled a Karak commander, his blade wings flaring. The Primarch ignored them all. His golden eyes never left Mason's. For a long, breathless moment, the two stood, predator and human, shadow and fire, bound by something older than civilization itself. "Follow," the Primarch rumbled finally. The human nodded once. The crowd parted as the great beast turned and walked from the arena, Mason following in his wake. Every eye followed them in stunned silence, the air vibrating with disbelief. The laughter was gone. The mockery had curdled into something colder, something that looked a lot like fear. They descended into the lower halls of the arena, a labyrinth of obsidian corridors and ancient firelight. The walls here weren't polished metal or glass like the assembly's spires. They were carved from the bones of extinct titans. At the center, the Primarch stopped before a massive door engraved with the sigil of the Varkun brood. When it opened, Mason's breath caught. Inside lay a chamber filled with relics, trophies of 1,000 hunts, skulls the size of shuttles, claws that gleamed like blades, alien armor still dented and scorched from forgotten wars. The Primarch turned, his massive silhouette framed by the crimson glow. "Do you know why the galaxy fears us, small Terran?" Mason's voice was quiet. "Because you kill anything that breathes." The Primarch's teeth flashed in a slow grin. "No. Because we never stop learning from what we kill." He stepped closer. "You fought without rage. You struck without waste. You killed because you chose to, not because you wanted to. That is what makes you kin." Mason tilted his head. "That's not how humans define kin." "Then perhaps your kind is closer to us than you realize." The Primarch lifted one of the relics, a curved talon from a creature extinct for millennia, and laid it on the stone floor before him. Then with a single claw he sliced open his palm, letting the dark ichor drip onto the talon. "Blood remembers strength," he said, "and strength remembers blood." Mason watched for a moment, then removed his glove and drew the vibroknife across his own palm. The wound bled bright red. He pressed his hand to the relic beside the Primarch's. The stone hissed. The two bloods mingled, black and red, steaming as they met. Something ancient stirred in the air. The chamber lights flickered. The bones on the walls vibrated with a low resonance, as though remembering the old language of survival. The Primarch's second hearts thudded once, twice, in unison with Mason's. When the glow faded, the relic was gone. In its place lay a symbol, two crescents entwined, red and gold burned into the stone. The Primarch spoke again, voice soft now. "From this moment the Varkun no longer hunt your kind. You are of the blood. You walk where predators walk." And Mason, blood drying on his hand, met the creature's gaze. "Then maybe together we can teach the galaxy what strength really means." The Primarch's laugh was like thunder. "The galaxy will learn, Terran," he said, "and it will tremble." Outside the chamber, news had already spread. Every network, every planetary feed, every whispered channel in the underworld carried the same impossible message. A Varkun called a human kin. Empires froze their trade convoys. Mercenary guilds halted recruitment. Even the predators of the rift systems, species that hunted starships for sport, paused their raids. The laughter that had followed humanity across the stars had died. In its place came the sound of 1,000 uneasy breaths, waiting to see what came next. The journey to the Varkun homeworld was not recorded in any galactic archive. No human ship had ever charted those coordinates, and those who tried vanished into static. The Primarch's vessel moved through space like a phantom, its hull pulsing with biometal veins that shimmered in patterns Mason couldn't decipher. He stood at the viewing bay, staring into the storm of stars. Beyond the glass, space itself seemed to ripple. Planets flickered in the distance, but they weren't lit by suns. They glowed from within, their cores burning with trapped energy like the hearts of sleeping beasts. The Primarch approached, his reflection towering behind Mason. "You're quiet." Mason smirked faintly. "Hard to make small talk when your ship hums like it's breathing." "It is breathing," the Primarch replied, placing one claw on the wall. The veins beneath his touch pulsed in rhythm. "The Varkun do not build dead machines. Our ships are alive, bound to our will. They feel our purpose, our hunger." Mason turned to face him. "And what's your purpose now? Bringing me to meet your family?" The Primarch's lips curled in what might have been a grin. "No, human. I bring you to meet the broodmind." The word carried weight. It was the pulse behind every Varkun heartbeat, their collective intelligence, the ancient consciousness linking every member of their species across the stars. When they arrived, the ship did not land. It merged with the planet. Black vines of alloy and flesh reached upward, weaving into the ship's structure, pulling it down into the planetary crust. Mason felt it in his bones, a deep vibration, like standing inside a thunderstorm. Then, silence. When the hatch opened, he stepped out into a world that looked more alive than dead. The ground beneath his boots was warm, like muscle under skin. The air shimmered with floating motes of light, bioluminescent spores drifting through the atmosphere. Mountains pulsed faintly, and in the distance, colossal structures breathed, opening and closing like gills. "Welcome to Varr'th," the Primarch said. "The first world, the heart of the Predator." Mason's gaze swept the horizon. It was terrifying, it was beautiful, it was alive. Varkun of all sizes watched him from afar, hunters, warriors, matriarchs with armored crests. None approached. Their golden eyes followed every move, uncertain, cautious. For the first time, Mason felt small. The Primarch gestured toward a massive structure, half cathedral, half beast, rising from the valley below. "The broodmind waits within." Inside, there was no throne, no council, no screens or circuits. Only a vast, organic chamber, its walls shifting with slow, rhythmic motion. In its center hung a heart, colossal, ancient, suspended by living cables. Every beat shook the air. The Primarch knelt, head bowed. Mason hesitated, then followed his lead. A voice filled the chamber, not sound, feeling. It pressed into Mason's thoughts like the weight of an ocean. "Human," he flinched. The voice was everywhere, behind his eyes, in his pulse, inside his bones. "The Primarch brings one knot of our blood, yet our blood remembers yours." Mason swallowed hard. "You know us." The broodmind's voice darkened. "We knew you. Long before your species named itself." The Primarch looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" The chamber pulsed. Images flooded Mason's mind, flashes of ancient hunts, battles beneath red skies, humans fighting with fire and steel against monstrous shapes that looked disturbingly familiar. "Impossible," Mason whispered. "Humanity wasn't part of your records." "Not records," the broodmind murmured. "Memory. Your kind was born from the same flame that forged us. When the universe was young, the first predators learned hunger and fear. You inherited both." The Primarch's eyes widened. "Then the humans are the reflection we lost," the broodmind finished. "They hunt not for dominance but for purpose. That is what we forgot. That is why you are kin." The chamber's walls began to glow, veins of crimson light pulsing outward. Mason staggered back, gripping his chest, his heartbeat syncing with the ancient rhythm. The broodmind's presence flooded through him, a tidal wave of primal instinct and cosmic memory. Images burst behind his eyes, human soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder, laughing in the face of death, predators kneeling in respect to fallen prey, the shared understanding between all things that fought to live. Then, silence again. The broodmind spoke softly now. "You carry something dangerous, Terran, not power, not technology, but meaning. That is what terrifies the galaxy." Mason looked up, voice trembling. "Then why bring me here?" "Because even predators must remember mercy," it said. "And you human are what we were meant to become." The Primarch bowed his head low. Mason just stood there, breath shaking, realizing that in the heart of a monstrous species, he had become their mirror. Outside, the sky shifted. Darkness moved across Varr'th, not night, but a shadow cast from orbit. Dozens of fleets, alien hostile, surrounded the planet. "They've come," said the Primarch quietly, rising to his full height. "Who?" Mason asked, turning toward the massive opening above the chamber. The Primarch's eyes burned like fire. "Those who laughed at you, Terran. Those who fear what they don't understand." Mason reached for his weapon. The Primarch bared his teeth. "Then let them learn," he growled. The first tremor shook the valley before the alarm sounded. Mason felt it through the soles of his boots, a slow roll that deepened into a pulse, then a roar as the sky split open. Plasma fire rained down in curtains of white. The Varr'th shrieked, not in fear but in anticipation, their war cries rolling through the flesh-grown canyons. Mason sprinted after the Primarch as organic walls peeled open, revealing tunnels lined with living armor and pulsing conduits. Every heartbeat of the planet matched his own. "Your people fight differently," the Primarch growled, handing him a weapon grown from bone and metal. Mason checked the weight, testing the balance. "We fight to end the fight." The Primarch's eyes glinted. "Then you will fit in well." Above them, the attacking fleets took shape, an alliance of species that had once mocked humanity's small stature. Now they gathered like carrion birds around a single wounded predator, hoping to erase both the Terran and the Varr'th in one strike. Inside the broodmine chamber, the massive heart beat faster. The air thickened, humming with low-frequency energy. The Primarch pressed one claw to the wall. "She is awakening." "The broodmine?" "No," the Primarch said. "Varr'th itself." The planet screamed. Mountains unfolded, revealing weapons that looked like skeletons of extinct gods. Energy arcs leapt from ridge to ridge. Mason watched in stunned silence as the surface of the world began to move, continents shifting like muscles flexing. Then the Varr'th charged. They poured out of the living fortress in waves, hundreds of thousands of them, armored in chitin that glowed with the broodmine's pulse. Mason followed, his weapon humming to life, the ground vibrating under every stride. The first enemy dropships pierced the clouds. Antimatter shells fell like rain. Mason dove for cover as explosions tore the valley apart. The Primarch barreled through fire, leaping onto a burning craft and ripping through its hull with bare claws. Mason rose, eyes narrowing. He aimed, fired once, and a plasma bolt tore through the ship's cockpit. "Small but deadly," the Primarch shouted over the din. "Keep watching," Mason replied. He sprinted forward, vaulting across the wreckage. A squad of reptilian mercenaries closed in, hissing commands in their guttural tongue. Mason ducked, rolled, and fired 3 more shots, clean, efficient, merciless. When his weapon ran dry, he drew his knife. They had called him small. They had laughed. Now they watched one human carve through an army built to kill worlds. All across the valley, similar scenes unfolded. Varr'th and human tactics meshed as if born from the same instinct. One striking fast, the other relentless. For the first time, the galaxy's apex predator and the frail Terran moved as one organism, every motion synchronized by shared fury. The broodmine spoke inside Mason's head again, deeper now, almost maternal. "Do you understand what you awaken, child of Earth?" Mason clenched his fists. "If it keeps them alive, then yes. Then let them see what kinship costs." A surge of heat burst through him. His weapon glowed brighter, veins of crimson light threading up his arm. Around him, Varr'th's soldiers howled as the same energy spread through their armor, amplifying every strike. The Alliance fleet began to falter. Their formation broke as Varr'th's surface erupted in defensive spires, beams of light tearing holes through the invading ships. Mason watched one vessel spiral down, flames trailing behind it like a comet, crashing into the far mountainside. Still, the enemy pressed on. For every ship destroyed, 2 more appeared from hyperspace. Mason wiped sweat from his brow, heart pounding. "They won't stop." The Primarch turned to him. "Then neither will we." They fought until the horizon glowed red. Hours blurred into seconds, fire, ash, blood, breath. Mason lost count of how many times he almost died. Each time the broodmind whispered, steadying his hands, guiding his aim. When the last of the first wave fell, the Primarch stood beside him, both drenched in soot and ichor. "They will send more," the creature said softly. Mason nodded. "Then let them. Maybe this time they'll understand what it means when humans stand beside monsters." The Primarch gave a low, rumbling laugh. "No, Terran. They'll understand that monsters were always human." Above them, the stars flickered. The second wave was coming. The second wave arrived like the night itself had decided to fall. Every sensor on Varr'th screamed. The sky was crowded with ships, their engines burning blue against the darkness. Mason could feel the pressure before the first shots landed, like the air itself was shrinking. The Primarch stood at the ridge beside him, gaze fixed upward. They brought the crucible. Mason didn't know the word, but his pulse quickened. "That doesn't sound friendly." "It's not a ship," the Primarch said. "It's a judgment, a weapon that eats worlds." The words hit like a punch. Mason looked again and saw it, an enormous sphere descending slowly through the upper atmosphere, veiled in lightning, its surface rippling with energy. It dwarfed the fleets escorting it. The sight alone pressed down on him, heavy as gravity. The Broodmind's voice filled the sky, carried through every vibration of the living planet. "We warned them. Now they bring death to the cradle of predators." The Primarch turned to Mason. "This is where your kind would run." Mason shook his head. "No, this is where we get creative." He sprinted down the slope, heading for the command trench where Varkun engineers were fusing organic conduits together. Their systems looked alive, arteries and nerves connecting to the planet itself. Mason pointed toward the crucible. "If that thing hits the surface, we're done." "Can we move it? Redirect it?" The lead engineer tilted her head, mandibles clicking in thought. "Not move, but perhaps feed it." The Primarch arrived just in time to hear. "Explain." "The crucible consumes energy until its core destabilizes," she said. "If the Broodmind opens the planetary vents, Varr'th's essence could flood its field." "In other words," Mason said, "we overload it." The Primarch looked to him, then to the pulsing walls around them. "The Broodmind will not survive that." "I know," Mason said quietly, "but everyone else might." Silence settled between them. Even the ground seemed to pause, waiting. Then softly the Broodmind spoke again. "I have watched 1,000 wars. I have birthed empires that devoured themselves. If sacrifice is the cost of remembering what it means to protect, then let it be paid." The planet began to awaken in full. Cracks split open across the plains. Lava light spilled through in rivers. The living fortresses retracted, exposing glowing veins of molten material that reached toward the sky. Mason could barely stand as the air trembled. The crucible fired. A beam of white energy struck Varr'th's surface, and the planet screamed back. The two forces collided mid-atmosphere, bending light, shredding sound. The clouds caught fire. Mason shielded his eyes as the explosion threw everything into chaos. The Varkun roared in unison, their war cries shaking the ground. Mason's ears rang with the fury of a world fighting to stay alive. He climbed onto a shattered spire, looking up as the crucible's outer shell began to ripple, distort, and collapse inward. The overload was working, but the Broodmind's voice was fading. "Do not mourn me, Terran. You remind them what they forgot. Tell them that mercy is not weakness. Don't you dare leave now." Mason shouted into the storm, even though he knew she could hear everything. "We will not end," the voice whispered. "We will remember." The crucible imploded. A blinding flash swallowed the horizon. The shockwave rolled outward, flattening mountains, vaporizing fleets. Mason hit the ground hard, feeling the air tear from his lungs. When the light faded, the crucible was gone. Only a burning ring of debris circling the wounded planet remained. The Primarch dragged himself from the rubble, armor cracked and smoking. "She did it," he said hoarsely. Mason pushed himself to his knees. "Yeah, she did." The battlefield was silent now. What ships survived turned and fled, their formations scattering into the dark. The invincible alliance was gone, retreating before something they could no longer understand. Mason looked up at the stars. "They'll tell stories about this," the Primarch nodded. They always do, but none of them will return. He turned to Mason, lowering himself until their eyes met. And when they ask what the Varkun call the humans now, Mason waited. The Primarch's voice rumbled low. "We call you kin." The wind carried the word across the broken valley. It was not shouted, not sung, but it spread like a pulse through the survivors, through the soil, through the cooling bones of the planet itself. Kin. For the first time in the galaxy's history, the apex predator had bowed to something smaller, and the stars would never forget it. The stars were quiet again, but not peaceful. Silence in the aftermath of war always carried weight, the kind that pressed down on every survivor until it shaped them. Mason stood at the edge of the crater where the broodmind's heart had once pulsed. The air was cool now, carrying a faint scent of ash and ozone. Above him, fragments of the crucible still glowed as they fell through the upper atmosphere like dying comets. The Primarch approached, armor cracked, movement slower than before. His shadow stretched long across the glass ground. "She is gone," he said. Mason nodded. "She's part of the planet now, maybe part of everything." The Primarch looked up, golden eyes reflecting the falling debris. "You think she forgave us?" Mason exhaled. "She didn't have to, she just remembered who she was." For a while neither spoke. The world around them was still rebuilding itself, the ground knitting shut, new growth already pushing through the black soil. The Varkun moved carefully, carrying their wounded, rebuilding their hives. There was no cheering, no victory songs, only the sound of something ancient learning to breathe again. When the first human ships arrived days later, they came cautiously, their hulls scorched from emergency jumps. They expected ruins. Instead, they found a living planet healing itself and two figures standing side by side at the center of it. The fleet commander's voice crackled over comms. "Lieutenant Mason Drake, this is Terran Command. We thought you were gone." Mason smiled faintly. "Not gone. Just busy making friends." The Primarch's heavy head turned toward the human vessels, curiosity flickering across his features. "They are small," he murmured. "They always are," Mason replied. "But don't underestimate them," the Primarch extended. One clawed hand. Mason looked at it, then shook it without hesitation. The moment felt impossibly simple and impossibly vast at the same time, the kind of gesture that rewrites entire histories. "You said once that we fight to end the fight," the Primarch said. "Is that still true?" Mason's gaze drifted toward the horizon where the sun was rising through the clouds, painting the wounded sky gold. "We fight," he said softly, "so we remember why peace matters." Above them, the human fleet and the surviving Varkun cruisers began to form a loose orbit around the planet. No one fired. No one threatened. For the first time in living memory, the galaxy's most dangerous species stood still together. And then the broodmind's voice returned, not as a sound, but as a presence threaded through the wind, faint and endless. "Do not forget." Mason closed his eyes. The words vibrated through his bones. The Primarch bowed his head. When Mason opened his eyes again, the stars seemed closer, as if watching. Somewhere out there, other civilizations would hear whispers of what had happened on Varr'th. They would argue about the details. They would send scouts that never came back. They would call the humans reckless, cursed, miraculous. But the truth would remain simple. No one returned after fighting humanity, not because humans destroyed everything they touched, but because those who survived could no longer see the galaxy the same way. They came looking for enemies and found kin. The universe would keep expanding, new wars, new empires, new stories. Yet, in one corner of the stars, a Terran soldier and a creature born to hunt stood beneath a single dawn, bound by the same memory. Somewhere deep below, the planet pulsed once, slow, strong, eternal, kin. And the echo of that word traveled farther than any fleet could ever go.